All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a massive paradox. We're looking at James Madison, the undeniable father of the Constitution and the architect of the Bill of Rights. And we're going to see how a quiet, studious guy essentially built a superpower. You know, when we think about the founding of the United States, we usually picture these towering generals or fiery, charismatic orators, right? But today's story is all about a brilliant, behind-the-scenes scholar who literally used ideas and political philosophy as his ultimate weapons to forge a new nation. Now look, we all know George Washington was undoubtedly the gravitational pull holding this fragile young nation together. He was for sure the figurehead, the indispensable man. But if we really want to understand the mechanics of the country, we have to ask a much deeper question. Who actually engineered the republic from the ground up? Who designed the actual machinery of the American government?
It's honestly hard to believe, but our founding hero here wasn't some commanding physical presence at all. James Madison was a frail, soft-spoken scholar. He much preferred the quiet confines of his library at his Virginia estate, Montpelier, over the chaos of a battlefield or the loud debates you'd find in a tavern. Yet it was inside that very library that he obsessively studied centuries of political philosophy, ancient republics, and failed confederacies. He was doing all the intellectual heavy lifting for a monumental task, taking 13 deeply divided, squabbling states and transforming them into a unified, enduring global powerhouse.
Section 1. Architect of the Constitution. Engineering a Republic.
So, the nation's first attempt at a government, the Articles of Confederation. Yeah, it just wasn't working. It was pushing the young country right to the brink of total collapse. The central government was essentially toothless. It couldn't pay its staggering war debts, it couldn't raise an army, and it had absolutely no mechanism to force individual states to actually comply with national laws. Madison realized pretty quickly that this excessive democracy and the inherent weakness of a loose confederation needed a totally new, balanced federal framework. Tinkering around the edges just wasn't going to cut it. They needed a total teardown and a rebuild.
So, Madison walks into the 1787 convention in Philadelphia with a master blueprint already in hand, the Virginia Plan. And it proposed something completely unprecedented for its time. Instead of just a single legislative body, he envisioned a central government divided into three distinct co-equal branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. He designed this incredibly complex web of checks and balances to ensure that no single branch, and really no single faction of the public, could ever wield too much power or slide into tyranny. And that is, quite literally, the exact system of government we live under today.
Section 2. Drafting the Bill of Rights. The Persuader.
But as you can imagine, getting the Constitution drafted behind closed doors was really only half the battle. He then faced the monumental task of convincing a highly skeptical, decentralized nation to actually adopt the thing. Writing under the pseudonym Publius, alongside Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, Madison co-authored the famous Federalist Papers. These 85 essays were basically a massive, high-stakes public relations campaign to save the country. He brilliantly argued that a strong union was absolutely essential to the happiness and real welfare of the people, and that state sovereignty just had to take a back seat if it conflicted with the greater public good.
Now here is a truly fascinating piece of political pragmatism. James Madison actually opposed a Bill of Rights at first. I know, right? He argued that the Constitution's structure already limited the government's power, and he was worried that listing specific rights might accidentally imply that any rights they forgot to list just weren't protected. But as the ratification debates raged on, he realized that compromising with his critics, the anti-federalists, was literally the only way to save the Constitution from being totally rejected. So he makes this brilliant pragmatic pivot and promises to add a Bill of Rights as soon as the new government convenes.
Picture this. It's 1789, and Madison is standing before the first Congress, delivering a powerful speech, reaching right across the aisle. This is an absolute masterclass in leadership and compromise. He understood the immense value of bringing critics into the fold of the new system rather than just isolating them as enemies. By making sure those who felt the Constitution didn't protect their liberties actually felt heard, he neutralized a massive threat. He effectively convinced the opposition to work within the bounds of the new government instead of actively trying to tear the whole thing down from the outside.
So, how did he do it? He basically crowdsourced our foundational liberties. It was an incredibly messy process, but he took hundreds of overlapping, sometimes totally contradictory demands from all those state ratification debates and single-handedly distilled them down into 19 core proposals. Then a congressional committee reworked those down to 12, and ultimately the states ratified 10 of them.
And those 10 amendments became the Bill of Rights, securing the very liberties, like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and protection from unreasonable search and seizure that we all exercise daily.
Section 3. The Fourth U.S. President. A Nation on the Brink.
Okay, let's fast forward to 1809. The architect is now the commander-in-chief, inheriting a young nation facing some massive international pressures. Madison, who is naturally cautious and diplomatic, suddenly finds his nation's sovereignty under direct attack. Just look at the compounding pressures crushing down on his administration here. Britain was aggressively restricting American trade, they were kidnapping thousands of American sailors at sea and forcing them into the Royal Navy, a practice called impressment, and they were heavily arming Native American resistance on the western frontier under Tecumseh. Meanwhile, a fiery new generation of politicians in Congress, known as the Warhawks, were fiercely demanding military retaliation.
Section 4. The War of 1812. America's second fight for independence.
Left with virtually no other option to defend national honor and maritime rights, Madison makes the monumental decision to take on the world's greatest naval power. But make no mistake, this was not a united decision. The House voted 79-49 and the Senate voted just 19-13. To this day, that remains the most narrowly decided formal declaration of war in U.S. history. The New England states fiercely opposed it, terrified of total economic devastation, while politicians from the South and West were relentlessly pushing for it.
Taking on the British Empire again was a massive gamble, and it honestly almost destroyed the republic he had just built. For an unprepared American military, the next 2.5 years were utter chaos. The war saw some really surprising naval victories, sure, but also some devastating, humiliating lows on land. Ultimately, the conflict wraps up with the Treaty of Ghent in December 1814. Now, while the treaty essentially just hit the reset button and restored pre-war borders, surviving the war proved something massive to the globe. The United States wasn't just a temporary experiment anymore. It was a permanent, resilient fixture on the world stage.
Section 5. The Burning of Washington. High-stakes drama. I mean, just imagine the sheer vulnerability of this young nation at the absolute lowest point of the war. In a shocking, devastating blow, British forces marched directly into Washington, D.C. in August 1814 with almost zero resistance. The president himself, the very man who wrote the Constitution, was forced to flee on horseback into the countryside, while the White House and the Capitol building were literally scorched right behind him. The entire Library of Congress was wiped out, which was a cultural loss so profound that Thomas Jefferson later sold his vast personal library to the government just to rebuild it.
But right in the middle of this immense devastation and national panic, we see an incredible act of courage. First Lady Dolley Madison deliberately delayed her own escape to make absolutely sure that national treasures wouldn't fall into enemy hands as trophies. She famously organized the rescue of the iconic Gilbert Stuart portrait of George Washington just moments before British troops arrived to set the executive mansion ablaze. Her actions saved a tangible, vital symbol of American resilience right when the literal halls of government were turning to ash. Talk about high stakes.
Section 6. Madison's Enduring American Legacy. The Complicated Architect.
Surviving the War of 1812 really forged a new, unified American identity, allowing Madison to eventually retire to Montpelier. But when we evaluate his legacy today, we absolutely have to look at the complete picture impartially. On one hand, we have the visionary architect who brilliantly codified American freedom and drafted the framework protecting our civic liberties to this day. Yet, we have to reconcile that towering achievement with the man who actively denied those exact same freedoms to over 100 enslaved people on his own plantation, and who spent virtually no political capital attempting to end the institution of slavery during his long life.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative question to consider. George Washington undoubtedly held the early nation together by the sheer force of his character and reputation. But when you look at the actual DNA of our government, the blueprint of our checks and balances, the creation of our Bill of Rights, and the survival of the Republic through its first existential war, is James Madison the true engineer of the United States? Think about that the next time you look at how our government operates today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.